For years, political insiders treated Pauline Hanson and One Nation like a temporary inconvenience, something loud, controversial, uncomfortable, but ultimately manageable. They assumed time would do the job for them. They assumed voters would move on. They assumed the party would fade into irrelevance. Well, here we are again, and One Nation is still standing. Not only standing, but forcing the major parties into panic mode. You can tell when a political movement is becoming dangerous to the establishment because suddenly everybody attacks it at once. The knives come out, coordinated criticism appears,
the Nationals
ads get
launched,
both
scandals
get
get
amplified.
this week off the back of the Sean Black sex offender saga, the man One Nation hired then fired. And look, it seems to have worked. The latest news poll recorded a 3-point drop in One Nation's support. However, a Sky News YouGov poll released on Wednesday showed support for the party jumped to 27%. And now that is level with Labor for the first time. And that's an achievement. Sky News contributor Kosha Gata explains how a party written off for decades went from a fringe entity to a game-changing political force.
It's the party on everybody's lips right now, not because it's new, but because it persisted. Because the conditions on the ground have finally caught up with the reason it existed in the first place. I'm talking about One Nation, of course, and to understand how it got here, it's helpful to zoom out. There's a pattern playing out across the Western world, predictable, cyclical, and yet consistently underestimated. For years, governments across the West have treated immigration as both an economic necessity.
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
The Nationals and activist group Get Up both launched attack campaigns this week linked to the Sean Black controversy, the man One Nation hired and then fired. The strategy was obvious: damage the party while momentum is building, hit them before they grow stronger, frame them as chaotic, unfit and unserious. And yes, one poll suggested support dipped, but another showed something far more important. One Nation level with Labor in a key measure at 27%. Whether every number holds or shifts later is almost beside the point. What matters is this: a party that was mocked for decades is now impossible to ignore. That is a political earthquake. Because One Nation's real power has never just been seats in Parliament. Its real power is influence. It drags debates into the open that the major parties would rather keep buried. It says things many politicians avoid saying.
Both major parties ran the same playbook. Immigration is growth, population is input, and expansion is virtue. Differences in tone maybe, but not in direction. Labor at least owns it. One has to give them that. The coalition, that's where the deeper failure sits. Because if conservatism means anything, it's conservation of institutions, of norms, the social fabric of a nation. And on the policy that shapes that most, namely immigration, they blinked. They talked about borders, but governed on volume. Stop the boats made headlines, but behind it, migration expanded, quietly, steadily, and then materially. They didn't resolve the tension, they locked it in. And that's the space One Nation now occupies, a space that's wide open for anyone really willing to say, without hedging, what many voters already feel, but the major parties just won't name. So where does this go? What's next for One Nation, and more importantly, for Australia? No one knows, but there are a few possible paths. Containment, in which migration moderates, pressure eases.
Love Pauline Hanson or hate her, one fact is undeniable. She has outlasted generations of critics. That should tell everyone something. The reason One Nation keeps returning is not magic. It is not media hype. It is not simply personality politics. It is because there are unresolved frustrations in Australia, and when mainstream parties fail to address them honestly, someone else eventually does. That's the real story. For years, both sides of politics sold a similar message. More migration meant more growth. Bigger population meant more economic energy. Rising numbers were framed as practical, modern, and necessary. anyone questioning the pace or consequences was often dismissed as backward, emotional, or extreme. But then everyday life started speaking louder than slogans. Housing became harder to afford. Infrastructure looked stretched. Traffic worsened. Rental pressure intensified. Communities felt like they were changing faster than governments could manage. And once people start feeling pressure directly in their own lives, polished talking points lose power very quickly. That is where One Nation found oxygen. The party stepped into the gap between official messaging and lived experience. That gap is where outsider movements thrive. When citizens feel elites are repeating lines that no longer match reality, trust breaks down. Now, let's be blunt here. The coalition especially should be worried. Labor's position is more straightforward. It generally embraces higher migration and multicultural growth narratives more openly. Voters may agree or disagree, but at least the stance is visible. The coalition's problem is different. It often talks tough on borders, national identity and conservative values, but many critics argue it governed with high migration settings anyway. In other words, strong rhetoric paired with weak follow-through. That contradiction creates opportunity. If conservative voters feel their own side won't represent them clearly, they start shopping elsewhere. And One Nation has been waiting at that checkout line for years. This is why the panic is real. The major parties understand something commentators sometimes miss. Small parties don't need to win government to cause chaos. They only need to siphon enough votes, shift enough preferences, and fracture enough coalitions to change everything.
That's how political systems get shaken. One Nation can pressure the coalition from the right. It can force Labor to defend unpopular policy settings. It can dominate media cycles with issues others wanted to avoid. It can turn once taboo debates into front-page questions. That influence matters more than many seat counts ever could. And Pauline Hanson herself deserves recognition as a political survivor, whether critics like it or not. She has been written off countless times, laughed at, condemned, declared finished. Yet she keeps returning because she understands something many polished politicians don't. Voters can forgive rough edges if they believe someone is genuine. Authenticity beats perfection more often than elites expect. You don't have to agree with every position she takes to see why supporters remain loyal. Many of them believe she says what she means. In an era of scripted politicians who sound like legal disclaimers, that alone has value. Now, can One Nation break through in a major way? That depends on whether current pressures ease or intensify. If housing improves, cost of living stress falls, and migration levels become politically manageable, then One Nation may remain influential, but limited, a force that shapes debate without dominating results. But if affordability worsens, trust keeps collapsing, and mainstream parties continue... Why? Because the demand survives. Too many analysts focus only on personalities. They ask whether Hanson is too divisive, too blunt, too controversial. But the deeper issue is not the messenger, it is the message space. If millions of voters feel ignored on immigration, affordability, identity, regional neglect, or distrust in institutions, someone will occupy that space. If not One Nation, then someone else. That is why the party matters far beyond one election cycle. This is bigger than Pauline Hanson. This is about a warning signal flashing across Australian politics. When citizens repeatedly look outside the two-party system, they are saying something profound. You are not listening. And when governments ignore that signal long enough, it grows louder. The smartest move for Labor and the coalition would not be endless attack ads. It would be honest policy reform. It would be treating voter concerns seriously instead of morally lecturing them. It would be admitting where systems are strained and presenting credible solutions. But too often, major parties prefer managing narratives over solving problems. That's why One Nation remains relevant. Whether it wins huge or not, it has already succeeded in one major sense: It forced uncomfortable conversations back into the mainstream. And once that happens, the political landscape changes permanently. So yes, the knives are out. Yes, the establishment is nervous. Yes, Pauline Hanson still knows how to make Canberra uncomfortable. And maybe that's the clearest sign of all, that One Nation is not yesterday's story. It is still part of tomorrow's fight. What do you think? Is One Nation a necessary wake-up call for Australia, or just a protest movement feeding frustration? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this debate is far from over. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next big political story.